Ladies and gentlemen, if you could join us. Still a few minutes to noon, so good morning, everybody. You've had two wonderful sessions just ahead of this, and I can assure you this is going to be a really fascinating one given the topic and the discussion India in the United States, making the most of the next 4 years. I'd like to welcome the panelists. I'd like to welcome all of you again for the PAFI annual show. It's nice to see a full room. Well, actually one that's filling up, I guess. We are talking of two democracies, one which had an election not very long ago, and the other which is set for an election in not too distant a future. So exciting times ahead, lots to talk about, especially given the kind of trajectory, the relations between the two countries. If you look at it in the last 25 odd years, where it was in 2000 and where we are now, it's been a fascinating journey across all levels. So whether it is G to G, government to government, whether it's business to business, whether it's people to people, Indians make up for the maximum number of students in the United States today, Indians going from India, beating China. Trade has gone up multiple times. There are some very interesting things that are happening at the defense level, at the government trade issues. If you really look at it, we are looking at cybersecurity, we are looking at outer space, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, of course, quantum computing, next generation telecommunications, the host of things on the table, basically making sure that the people-to-people relations between the two countries, and obviously a very large diaspora that lives in the United States, things are very different today than they were several years ago. So we have a very strong panel here, and I would love to introduce Ambassador Shyam Saran. He's the former Foreign Secretary. We have Arun Singh, former Ambassador of India to the United States, France, and Israel. And we also have Manjeev Puri, former Ambassador of India to the European Union and Nepal. Each of them brings a very definitive perspective into the issues between the two countries, and the conversations will be led by Suhasini Haidar, who is the Diplomatic Affairs Editor for The Hindu. A lot of us read what she writes, and many of us probably also follow her on YouTube, where she does a lovely program very regularly. So Suhasini, on to you. Just one little point I wanted to make was that while there is a huge lot of understanding and appreciation of what's happening between the two countries, the G to G, P2P and B2B level, there's also the fourth level that I keep looking at, and a lot of you must be looking at, and that I call the social media level. The narrative there is, of course, sometimes very strange and very different from what the reality is. So I would love to hear, issues from ladies and gentlemen. Suhasini, all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rahul. And thank you, everyone. If everyone could just settle down before we start. We don't want to get between you and your lunch. But I can't think of a better time to have this gathering and to have this discussion as this week. As we speak, Prime Minister Modi has announced his visit to the US. It's a three-pronged visit, and I think that tells you really what the relationship is like. The first day will be at the Quad Summit and discussing regional as well as international issues, global issues. The second day with the diaspora and meeting with business community in the US, and the third would be at the United Nations and dealing with that. We had a small morning surprise. My phone's been buzzing since early morning because we heard former US President Trump announce that Mr. Modi was coming to see him and that he would be discussing all kinds of issues with him, but also making the point that India is a big abuser when it comes to trade. So what you were saying about the difference in perception on social media makes it all extremely interesting and something that we have to be engaged with week to week. And I can tell you that if I wasn't sitting on the stage, I'd be sitting in the audience taking notes from this particular session, because we have with us three very wise and very, very experienced diplomats. So I would really pay attention to every word they say, because sometimes they speak in between the lines as well. We could talk about what's happening right now. We've just had an INDESX, we've just had an ISET technology, the first such meeting with the national security advisors as well. We're going into this Quad summit, but we want to start really by taking a longer view. And I'd like to go across all our panelists today and start by really asking how you see November 5th, as in the day after. What is it that this election can change for India-US ties? What is the difference between having former President Trump or having Vice President Kamala Harris as the next president of the US? What does it mean for the next 4 years? Ambassador Saran, if I could start with you.
Thank you very much, Suhasini. What would likely change after the elections results are announced in November? There is such a density of bilateral relations now between India and the US, and very broad-ranging, that I think we will probably see a fair degree of continuity with respect to India-US relations. But there are uncertainties because the manner in which, say, Trump or Kamala Harris handled various regional conflicts like Ukraine or the Middle East, what is the kind of policies we may see with respect to China, because I do see that there is a certain kind of shift taking place in US-China relations, which, by the way, is the prism through which both the US and India look at each other. That's a very important aspect, that the cementing factor between India and the US, in a very real sense, has been a certain common perception of threat from China. Now, while that may be structural in character, I do not see a kind of a frozen situation, because even now you see that the US being engaged in the Middle East against its own perhaps intent, also with respect to Ukraine, it does not want a third conflict area in the Indo-Pacific, even though Indo-Pacific is supposedly the center of US strategic thinking at the moment. So there are shifts taking place where a certain kind of an accommodation with China on some issues is already visible. Which is the way in which this is going to be taken forward by Kamala Harris or by Trump is something that may, in fact, impact on us, precisely because each one of us is looking at the relationship through that prism. And the other aspect that I would like to mention is that there seems to be a sense here that, Trump being very transactional in character, perhaps it is easier for us to deal with him. And there are people who say, actually, we'll deal with him quite positively in a sense. And therefore, we should not be fearful of a Trump presidency. Yes and no. Because I think he has already mentioned the trade factor. And so for people who in the business community here, that would certainly be an important aspect. The other aspect, as I said, is how he handles these other major crises will have a collateral impact on India. And I think we should be conscious of that. And there will be some areas where perhaps there may be heightened irritation between the two countries. Bangladesh is a very good example. There may be some other issues on which there may be differences. A Kamala Harris may be perhaps more focused on what is happening domestically in India in a manner that perhaps Trump may not be. So there are these nuances which we have to be, we have to be conscious about. I do not see major shifts taking place, but diplomacy always works at the margin like economics. It's whether it is a little more or a little less, and I think in that respect there could actually be differences.
All right. Ambassador Arun Singh, if I could take that to you, Mr. Saran has really pointed out important things like China, how the transactional nature of the leaders will be, domestic issues. Do you see major shifts?
Thanks, Suhasini.
You'll have to turn that on.
Thanks, Suhasini. So just to supplement what Foreign Secretary Shamsaran said, there could be changes and there need not be. And that's because the relationship with India still, since the time of President Clinton, has been largely driven by the White House, because it's a new relationship. It was President Clinton who took the call to support India when we had the Kargil conflict in 1999, and then came to India in 2000 for 5 days and visited Pakistan for 5 hours on the way back. And if you saw what Deputy Secretary of State Richard Verma said a couple of days ago, that it was he who started the process of dehyphenating the US-India and the US-Pakistan relationship. Similarly, it was President Bush who took the call to strengthen the relationship with India and do a civil nuclear cooperation agreement. And people who worked with him said repeatedly that he's the one who said, I want to do more with India. And whenever the negotiations on the civil nuclear agreement stalled, both in the bureaucracy and Congress, it was President Bush who pushed it through. And so the president played a role. Similarly, in the case of President Obama, there was a lot of anxiety in the beginning that he had, in some ways, opposed the civil nuclear cooperation agreement. He had seen that India had become very close to President Bush. You might recall that in September 2008, when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had visited the US, and he met President Bush at a time when President Bush was extremely unpopular because of what was happening in Iraq. And the Indian Prime Minister said to him that the people of India deeply love you. And so that, had a certain impact. So, but when President Obama came in, he said that, okay, although he had opposed the civil nuclear cooperation agreement earlier, now he took it as settled law. And then in October 2008, in an interview to Time magazine, he had said that he was thinking in terms of appointing a special envoy for India-Pakistan relations and the Jammu and Kashmir issue, and that Bill Clinton could be that envoy. Now, you can imagine the negative impact that would have had on the relationship. But once he became president, he completely kept India away from even the ambit of the special envoy Richard Holbrooke on Afghanistan, Pakistan. And then President Obama was the one who took the call to come to India on a Republic Day as chief guest. No US president had done that. He took the call to support India's permanent membership of UN Security Council. And there was deep division within the administration. And then he invited the Indian Prime Minister in 2009 as the first state visitor of the Obama administration. So these are signals that come from the president because you still need a drive at that level to take the relationship to newer stages because it's a new relationship in a sense. And similarly, in the case of President Trump, he put India on STA authorization level 1. And then he reactivated the Quad because the Quad had been languishing after 2007. And then he took the Quad to foreign minister level meetings and started the process of 2+2 dialogue between India and Pakistan. And in the case of President Biden, among the signature achievements of his presidency, and there have been several, one of course taking the Quad to summit level meetings, but to do this initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which has brought in an entirely new framework for cooperation between the two countries. And both are now saying that technology is going to be the defining parameter of the relationship. And this, again, the ISET initiative has been driven by the White House and the National Security Council. Therefore, who becomes president? What is the structure of the National Security Council? What are the issues that are getting attention there? What is the emphasis being placed on technology, on Quad, on the Indo-Pacific, as Ambassador Saran mentioned? These are things that are going to have an impact on the relationship. And so there we have to assess, and I think one can expect that broadly Kamala Harris presidency would continue from where the Biden presidency has been, although they'll want to bring in new elements. But the Trump presidency would be very erratic. You know, he started in 2017-18 by being very tough on Pakistan and saying that Pakistan has hoodwinked the US, we have to stop assistance to Pakistan. And then suddenly in 2019, when he wanted to get Pakistan's support to do an agreement with the Taliban, he invites Imran Khan to the White House. And there he says that I'm ready to mediate on Kashmir and that the Indian Prime Minister has asked me to mediate on Kashmir, which is simply not possible. And the Indian Foreign Minister had to make a statement in Parliament that there is no truth in this. And then he took measures against India on trade. He removed GSP benefits. He publicly derided the Indian Prime Minister for the kind of tariffs there were, including on Harley-Davidson, and then imposed tariffs on aluminum and steel. So basically, the Trump presidency would be erratic, it would be transactional, but he was handled in a certain way. And so there is a lot of convergence in the relationship. So let me just conclude by saying that a couple of days ago, the Indian External Affairs Minister was speaking at a book launch. And he said, in the India-US relationship, you don't have an alliance, you don't have congruence, but you have convergence. And again, similarly, a couple of days ago, Richard Verma speaking at Hudson Institute, that the relationship has entered an era of convergence. So at least there is convergence in terms of how both are describing where the relationship is. So I think that's...
All right, and we will discuss the divergences as well in just a bit, but Ambassador Puri, would you like to tell me, Trump, Harris, you can just tell me very straight which one's better, and then we can all wrap this up for India.
Suhasini, thank you very much. This is a very tough act for me. You imagine, Ambassador Shyam Saran was my boss. Arun taught me in college the last year that I did this. I haven't served in the United States, and I am supposed to answer the question for you guys. But I will try to. Let me say a few things. What will happen in the immediate aftermath of the 4th of November? Hopefully the results will be known by the 5th or the 6th. There's the G20 summit. What do you think will happen there? Will the Brazilians be able to take forth some of the ideas that we have got or they have got or the countries of the global south have got? Supposing it's Trump who wins, the Americans will simply say, sorry, we can't really do anything. Even if it's Kamala Harris, the American delegation will have a very good answer to give. You know, we are in a transition phase. The next one is the COP29 in Azerbaijan. I am very clear in my mind, this money for climate finance, yes, you may get some kind of a solution. But the real ones, here is a straightforward answer. This is why this date is important for the world. And I'm not talking about Ukraine and Gaza and all those sort of things, Indo-Pacific and all that stuff. Arun, thank you very much for reminding us of the famous George W. Bush re-election and Prime Minister of India. The whole world had hardly anything good to say about George Bush. And the world said, there's one country that loves George Bush. I don't know what you guys would say about Donald Trump. And which is that one country which is in love with him? Let's leave it at that. Okay, we all know the answers. Why are we like that? I don't know the answers to that also. Or maybe I know and you know the answers to that. But out of the two, I'll just say one little point to you. A Democrat administration, you know, they tend to have this hegemonic America agenda at the back. In front, you see all this human rights and this kind of stuff. But actually, this is the old guard which plays the hegemonic America, which is why the entire business of Ukraine, etc., happened when a Democrat was the president of the United States. We forget this Crimea and all this business. The Republicans in recent past, I'm not talking about 50 years back, have become a party much more of isolationism. Trump perhaps embodies that in a different set of the world. But having said all this, and leaving aside all these irritants which tend to come about as a result of a Democrat administration, and we are hearing all the stuff about Bangladesh, you know the names, I don't have to take the names. Most of us are familiar with those people as individual interlocutors. I've never served bilaterally in the United States, but these chaps whose names you hear are personally known to me. And we've sat across the table any number of times. If they see me here, they'd walk up to me and say, you're the guys still around out here? That's the nature of this particular polity. These are old countries. They carry on in the same way. My own understanding is that a Kamala Harris presidency will be more of Biden. We'll have lots of things to do. We'll have to be a little more thick-skinned. We'll have to take a little bit of hits. In our neighborhood, they'll have their own views. Arun, thank you for using the words transactional or erratic for Trump. And Ambassador Saran, who said that, there's density in what we've done. But I want to leave two thoughts with you. One is this trade business. Don't be so sanguine. Have you seen the trade figures? Today we have a trade between both merchandise and services of about 190 or 200 billion. It's 2/3 in our favor. Can you imagine what Mr. Trump would say by just looking at it? Just think about that. Secondly, this thing of immigration. Nobody talks about it. And let's not be so sanguine. We are highly qualified. We are good guys. We don't fall into that people don't like us category, etc. We will get everything. Don't be so sanguine. And that actually hurts you and me and people like us. I don't know the answers. You come in on a plank of immigration, my God, it can go around to anyone. So I don't know the answers. Who will win? If I could predict this, frankly, let me tell you, I wouldn't be sitting in front of you all. But in my view, a continuation of the current thing is okay. It's a scenario that is known. With all its downs, it's fine. The other one can also be handled, but erraticity can have its ratcheting impact. However, do remember, and I'll stop now, the other one will be only for 4 years. This one, I don't know the answer. I mean, it's 4 and it could be another 4. Thank you.
That's a very important point right at the end. I can tell you as a journalist, I know which one is going to give me headlines on a daily basis off my social media itself. I won't have to look too far. But thank you for just putting out all the issues between India and the US that could be affected. Because obviously we have some 300 dialogues now going on, and there are many areas which will not be touched at all. I think many in this room would be very interested if we start unpacking this and maybe look at two areas, which is trade and technology. And if I could start with you, Ambassador Singh, in the Trump era, there was a real push for a free trade agreement. We don't know if that will continue because even during his own tenure, I think at some point the Trump administration gave up on getting that FTA with India. The Biden era, as you said, has been much more about working on technology. Prime Minister Modi is making a point of meeting with business leaders in the US this time who deal with AI, who deal with quantum, who deal with semiconductors and that sort of thing. At the same time as the US is talking to India about doing so much with us, there is an undercurrent of protectionism. There is an undercurrent of, particularly in the Democrat administration, of upping export controls, particularly when it comes to their enemies, Russia, Iran, North Korea, China. They're making it much more about the divide between them and their rivals. I want you to paint a picture for us about how far you see some of the sort of initiatives taken in the Biden era forward in the next 4 years, and particularly if you can tell us what you think the future of the jet engines, the GE 414 deal is.
So starting with the Trump period, they gave up on the free trade effort very early on, and then they started talking of a limited trade agreement. And the limited trade agreement was discussed for more than 2 years, and nothing came out of it. And the reason for it is that there are existing interests on both sides, that whenever concessions were attempted on both sides, they intervened to block the concessions. So the progress could not be made. And so that was one of the reasons why, or one of the thoughts behind this initiative on critical and emerging technologies, that if you cannot do even limited trade agreements based on existing pattern of production, then why not start by cooperating in the newer and emerging technologies, by working on co-development of those technologies, see if that can lead to production sharing, and based on that, what kind of sectoral trading arrangements you put in place so that trade is facilitated in those areas where, there are challenges in India, but there are huge challenges in US. US has not done a free trade agreement since 2012. And there are political challenges. So they are also not in a position to do it, but sectoral arrangements could be looked at. And so I'll give you one example. If you just look at semiconductors, after cooperation in semiconductors was announced in the framework of the ISET process and the broad mood that it generated, 6 US companies stepped up after that to announce fresh investments: Micron, Applied Materials, Lam Research, and others. Once that was done, soon enough, our Ministry of Commerce and the US Department of Commerce entered into an MOU on semiconductor supply chain as to how can they, through the trading facilitation, encourage something like that to happen. And just a few days ago, the US Department of State has announced that under the funding that has been made available in the CHIPS Act, $500 million have been given to the US Department of State to look at encouraging supply chain of semiconductors, and $100 million to be done each year. And they're now going to start looking at the semiconductor ecosystem in India and mapping that out to see how a supply chain between US and India can be facilitated. So that's one example. How through cooperation, technology partnership, production arrangements, you then look at a sectoral trading arrangement. Another area where you're hearing talk already of a sectoral trading arrangement is in critical minerals, because that's again a strategic area. There's huge Chinese domination. Efforts are being made by different countries to tap new sources of critical minerals, not just for mining, but also for processing. And India has now become a member of the Mineral Security Partnership. And so that, again, is an area where people are looking at joint investments. And then based on that, what kind of a trading arrangement that you can work out within MSP partners so that, security of supply chain, sustainability of production, et cetera, are looked at. So I think a whole new effort is being made which can facilitate co-development of technology, production sharing, and trading arrangements. So I think that's one of the things that both governments can look at positively in the coming period.
All right. And you're certainly making that as with the underlying assumption that everything will stay the same. I ask this because in 2016, when Prime Minister Modi announced that we were going to join the COP in Paris and accepted the Paris Protocol in a sense, many had questioned whether we should have announced it quite so early, because we were doing it really for the outgoing president, President Obama, assuming that he would just hand over to Hillary Clinton. When Trump came to power, he didn't just walk out of the Paris Protocol, out of the COP agreement. He walked out of all the commitments for funding, like you're speaking now about the semiconductor supply chains. He walked out of the JCPOA, so all India's interests in Iran took a real backseat, even though they did give us a carve-out for Chabahar. And he walked out of the idea that he would be kind to India on any of the trade and tariff arrangements, which we had been discussing with the Obama administration. So I do want to quickly ask, do you think it'll change? If Trump comes to power, will he be saying, no, you pay me for semiconductor technology. I'm not going to put money in your countries. Why should we be even manufacturing outside the country?
So in this case, I don't think it will change because it is hardcore interest of US private sector that is involved. The US has said repeatedly that their main economic, technological, and military challenge is China, despite whatever they are facing. And US companies recognize that to deal with the challenge from China, a country with 1.4 billion people, they need a partnership with India. And if you look at, for example, the number of global capability centers that have come up in India, 1,600, and they're expanding. And they're not just doing back office work. Now they're doing cutting-edge R&D and technology development work. 60% of the GCCs are owned by American companies. So there is a recognition in the US today. And again, semiconductors, for example, we have not done fabs so far, but 20% of the designers in semiconductors are located in Bangalore. And so in terms of human capital, there is a huge concentration in India. And I think there's a recognition in the US that you need this partnership with India for the US to remain technologically competitive and in the lead vis-a-vis China. So because of that, I don't think they'll go back. And just to add to that, if you look at the Obama-Trump transition, there are a couple of things that Trump walked out on, but a couple of things that he did what the Obama administration had put in place. One of those was the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, something that the Obama administration had happened. And when they were leaving, and I was discussing with them at that time, the next Global Entrepreneurship Summit, set up for India deliberately so that the incoming administration would have to focus on India. And Ivanka Trump came to India for that summit. And that focused the attention of the Trump administration. And then Obama had declared India a major defense partner. Trump built on that and put India as STA level 1 authorization for highest level technology releases equal to the NATO partners of the US.
Even as he took away our GSP.
Yes, on trade he took it away, certain things. So as I said, he's transactional, he's erratic. But there are certain things that he did. And therefore, he will be mindful of US business interests because he also wants to, America first. So I think certain things they will continue with. But what I worry about is that there will be a new National Security Council, whoever wins. How they are structured, including to deal with technology issues, will determine the pace and direction of how the ISET process moves.
All right. Ambassador Saran, since Ambassador Singh has now started the conversation about China, you call China, in a sense, the threat from China, or the perception of the threat from China, a cementing factor in the India-US relationship. And one of the things that certainly Mr. Trump continued from Obama and took to the next, or from previous administration, took to the next level was the Quad. He oversaw the resurgence of the Quad, if you like. We saw the US Pacific Command become the Indo-Pacific Command. So a lot of terminology that moved over there. So my first question would really be, how do you see the relationship with China moving? Some have said in writings, and famous sort of analysts have said, that India will have to, in the next few years, take a stance. So while we have our bilateral issues with China, India has, on the multilateral sphere, seemed a little diffident. Ambassador Richard Verma, you were speaking about him at the Hudson Institute, made it very clear that India does not want the Quad to be a military structure. It does not want the Quad to be even a strategic structure in that sense, and is hesitant to go ahead. There have been many times the question asked about where will India stand if there is a Chinese aggression towards Taiwan. I wanted to ask you, how much is that a factor in the future of India-US relations, really, whether India takes a stand along with this side or stays apart as it has in the past?
Number one, having been through a fairly longish diplomatic career, one thing which I have come to appreciate is that nothing is written in stone. We had, after all, the Nixon Shoku of 1971, you have had a complete makeover in China-Russian relations. Looking at that longer-term perspective, I think it is wise not to take the relationship with any country, including the United States of America, as something which is a kind of a stable factor, which we can assume will continue. So that's just a cautionary note, because the United States of America is a global power. Therefore, it determines its strategy on the basis of its global perspective. And in that global perspective, there may be phases, like right now, where a relationship with India is very critical. There may be other phases where that relationship may be somewhat dispensable. So that reality we should keep in mind. Second, I would like to also, I pointed out in my earlier remarks that there are some shifts taking place in China-US relations because of compulsions, because of the fact that the US is overextended. And therefore, it would not like to have another conflict on its hand in the Indo-Pacific. So you might have seen some articles in the US press saying the US should not encourage Philippines to be reckless in terms of what it is doing. Although the US has said that the Philippines is an ally, and anything which happens in the South China Sea, in the area claimed by Philippines, the US will come to Philippines' assistance. Now you say that, but at the same time you are also saying, don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat, because at this point of time, you do not want to have a difficult relationship with China, more difficult than it already is. The other aspect which should worry us, and I say this, and Manjeev is also been very much involved in the climate change negotiations. On several multilateral issues, the relationship between India and the US is adversarial. That's the only way to describe it. So if you take, as for example, WTO issues, multilateral trade issues, we are not on the same side. On climate change, you mentioned the fact that we made a certain very important concession at Paris. What have we got out of it? You know, and today there are intense consultations taking place between the US and China in the run-up to the next COP. We are not part of those consultations. So is there going to be another climate change regime worked out between the US and China, which will just be imposed on the rest of the world? That's not good for us. So while there are areas where I think our interests with the US are aligned, we should also be conscious of the fact that there are areas where they are not necessarily aligned. Technology has been mentioned by Arun, and I think that's very important. The fact that we are in a geopolitical moment where the US is ready to share very high technology with India. And there are various examples of that. My worry is that it is India which does not have the digestive capability for many of these high technologies. The reason why the Chinese were able to take such great advantage of their access to US technology, Western technology during their very high growth phase, because they deliberately went about setting up an ecosystem in China which could first adopt technology, assimilate it, and now they are able to generate them. That kind of an ecosystem still, I'm afraid, does not exist in India. GCCs, very important. They are, you know, I think they demonstrate the fact that that capability is there in India. But what is that capability being used for? You know, whatever is being produced in the GCCs, they are all black box. That's not coming to India. That's not creating IPR for India. That's creating IPR for, you know, US multinationals. So I think we should also be, in terms of, you know, particularly business, you know, I think you need to also think in terms of how we can learn from the Chinese experience and set up that kind of an ecosystem. Because this favorable moment when the US is ready to share those technologies with you, perhaps that might change. So I think these are all perishable commodities. These assets are perishable commodities. And you should learn how to take advantage of them as quickly as you can. And you know, that was the experience with the nuclear deal. If we did not get that deal through before 2008, do you think that would have been possible afterwards? No. For the simple reason, like if you take the agreement, if there is a disruption in nuclear fuel supplies, who will come together to help India? Russia is mentioned in that. Would that be possible today? All these actors work together to get India the NSG waiver. You know, would that be possible today? So I think this is something that we have to keep in mind with respect to there are some issues where we should recognize that our positions and our interests are not necessarily aligned with the US. And on those, we will have to work hard. So even if you have, say, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, we are not part of the trade pillar, where I would think that that is probably one of the most important pillars there. So, you know, it's not that you can compartmentalize technology from trade. They are at various points linked together. So it is a much more complicated situation that we are facing than perhaps we seem to be aware of.
So the part you said just now about India's taking care of its own interests. In the last few years, we've heard the government say that again and again. Mr. Jaishankar has been on international platforms saying India will take care of its interests, for example, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And despite the US saying in the beginning, now they have come to terms with it, that India should really not try and buy oil from Russia, India went ahead and said, this is where I'm getting cheap oil. has increased from taking 0.5% of its oil from Russia to getting 40%. If Russia-India bilateral trade has increased from, say, $10 billion to $60 billion, most of it is this oil. The reason I ask this question is that was a decision taken with the Biden administration. However, in 2017, India took the opposite decision. During the Trump administration, when they said cancel all oil, or they used the phrase zero out all oil imports from Iran and Venezuela, India actually caved and didn't bring those back even when the Biden administration came to power. So my question really is about the future of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the future of even the Israel-Gaza conflict, and other conflicts around the world. Do you think in the next 4 years, depending on who gets elected, India is going to be put to the test really, as I said in my first question, to choose, to pick a side, to be with the US and its allies, or to face their sanctions or wrath in other ways?
We have always faced those pressures. There has always been a demand on India that you should choose sides. Yet we have not, we have said multi-alignment, or we have said, okay, there are coalitions of interests that we will work through rather than ally ourselves with one or the other country. So I think both the reality of those pressures and our record in terms of, resisting those pressures, where we may have some moments when our room for maneuver is somewhat more limited, we may concede more. When our room for maneuver is somewhat more expanded, we may perhaps resist somewhat more.
The differences between a more predictable Biden and
I think those are, there may be nuances in that respect, but I don't think that merely because it is Trump who's making that demand and therefore we have to cave in. And if Biden was making that demand, we maybe don't have to cave. I don't think it is as simple as that. I think in each case, we do determine in some way what plus or minus what is the end result for us. So I think that will continue, irrespective of whether it is a Biden, whether it is a Kamala Harris, or whether it is Trump. There will be pressures on us to choose. And I think we will have to work out in what way we are able to, deflect that kind of pressure. But having said that, what I certainly see is that with respect to the Russia-Ukraine war, there could be a lot of collateral damage on India if this goes, escalates beyond the point. So I think you will see that even the US is very cautious in terms of, the use of long-term missiles, long-range missiles. So this could be something that, who knows what, will Trump say, we just stop this. It will have its own, global consequences. It will have major consequences for Europe, But I think what my sense is that irrespective of what happens, it is very clear that you cannot have a stable European security architecture without Russia in some way being part of that. That is not possible. Otherwise, it will continue to be unstable. I mean, you had the Helsinki process, which brought about a degree of stability for several years. So that is one. And I think we are trying to get that kind of a message across, and in our own way, can we play some kind of a role in bringing that about? I don't know whether we can, but at least there seems to be some effort to do that. You do need, in a highly polarized kind of a global environment, you do need countries which can, in fact, play the role of a bridge. I'm not very sure whether we have the capacity to play that, but certainly I think in such a polarized world, there is a certain value to having those kind of interlocutors. And I think we are very consciously trying to, position ourselves in that way. Whether it will work, I don't know. Even the Chinese have tried it and it has not quite worked, but that's something which...
So we see where that goes. Ambassador Puri, of course, you said at the beginning that you hadn't served in the US, but you have dealt with the US in our neighborhood quite a bit. And if there's been one shift in the last, obviously everyone in India has been watching China's increasing inroads in India's neighborhood with some concern, feeling cut out in contracts and all the rest of that. But in the last few years, what we have seen is the US, and particularly, I think, the Biden administration, taking a much greater interest in India's neighborhood. Some of it has been very positive for India. For example, US AID actually funding projects that are done by Indian companies in Sri Lanka. The USMCC, perhaps somewhere where India and the US could collaborate. Other projects where India is working and the US is looking to assist those. But there are other areas where they seem to be in a little bit of contest when it comes to the political structure, and most recently we've seen that in Bangladesh. How much do you think a future government in the US could change the position, particularly at a time when India is feeling, let's be honest, uncomfortable in its neighborhood and its ties with the neighborhood?
Suhasini, thank you very much. Have you all noticed one thing? There's one word which permeates a discussion between India and the US, and that word is China. So is this relationship because of China? I think we have to recognize it is in very large measure. Second thing, we need to be very wary of some kind of a US-China compact, because we would be the ones which would be perhaps most affected because of this border business and geographical proximity. Having said all this, for me, perhaps the saddest is that we are not able to make this an India-US thing. We are the largest country in the world today. We are the 5th largest economy, and nothing can stop us from becoming the 3rd largest economy. For us to leverage the other things, let's leave the slogan hearing apart. There are 2 economies that you need to partner: the United States and Europe. Why? Because we are comfortable with them. The Chinese are the other alternative. We also need to do something with them. I have a much more practical view. If we did this, and the answer there lies in what Ambassador Saran was strongly saying, get your own act together. Be a bit more relaxed. If we'll keep putting up these barriers and so on, you're not going to be able to get it. You have to have that degree of confidence in yourself. That's particularly important. Coming to the neighborhood. So, Asini, the neighborhood is the neighborhood, and the neighborhood we have on our western side, those are very complex issues. I want to leave those out. Pakistan, Afghanistan, and all those business, very much more complex and so on. But if I look at Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, all the way down to Sri Lanka and even the Maldives. Look, I'm an old-fashioned guy. Frankly, I'm happy to say this little Rabindranath Tagore expression. This is Ekla Chalo Re for us. There are many in the Indian Foreign Service who don't agree with me. We were sitting outside and we were having a discussion, and many pointed out to somebody using metaphors for the importance of the US presence here. I feel very much you give them an inch, they take 10 miles, and they will. You know, I went to Nepal as ambassador at the beginning of 2017, where all of you know what had happened just the year before that. Many upside downs, etc. But I had occasion to meet a very senior member of the American establishment, who was a friend of mine, known from many other years, came to see me, he's not serving in their embassy. And I asked him, hey guys, are you looking at what they are doing here from the northern side into Nepal? And he shook hands with me and said, Manjeev, you're talking about some old era. It's all gone. These are the facts. They have their own interests. We start buying the theory that they are listening to us. No, they are not. This MCC you mentioned, I'm sorry, I was very clear in my mind. Let's be straightforward. You want to be players in the world now. You want to go up from this 3rd position in the world to what Goldman Sachs says, you'll be the 2nd largest economy in the world in 2075. Learn and remember the fact that this hegemonic game gets you also in. You must play with players, you must play with friends, but you must also remember where the end game is. Somewhere in your neighborhood at least, ensure that you have your own thing. It's a tough call today. The Chinese at $13-14 trillion versus us at $3 trillion. Very tough call. But, ceding, then you give a lot of space and things become very difficult to take in. Talking about issues such as Bangladesh, which is in everybody's mind and which I talked about. I told you the Democratic Party has several elements to the way it goes. One of those is this issue of rights, etc. And then there is this entire hegemony America, the hegemonic America and its things. They looked at it like that. Suhasini, this thing about Bangladesh, today many people are talking about people, they are mentioning members of the State Department, etc. I mean, I can tell you, when I first went as ambassador to the European Union, and the last time around elections were held in Bangladesh, the same problems were there. And all of us were clearly told, and rightly so, man, let the Western world allow Bangladesh to do what it's doing, which meant really let the government there. Don't try to stymie it, because Western pressure is important for Bangladesh. Remember, the exports, the fact that it's become a huge economy, their per capita income has gone up. They understand this. And Sheikh Hasina's son lives in the United States. Let's understand, they know all of this pretty well. It's not just the China game and the Pakistan game in all of this. These are important. So I look at all of this and I say, it's all right. US aid funds some project, it's okay. But let's be very clear that these are the areas where, to the extent possible, we should try and do things ourselves, including putting a lot of money in it. It's important. You want to grow your hegemony? Remember, people look at you first from what you are in your neighborhood. Are you a player or are you the second one? I'll make a small point and then stop. About a year or two back, in one of our gatherings of Foreign Service officers, a colleague of mine walked up to me and said, you talk about India and Nepal and that you guys call the shots. What are you talking about? You are number 3 out there. Not true. By far not true. But if these are the perceptions, and perceptions matter, which is why I have this view. Suhasini, it's my view. It's not necessarily the corporate view of India or the view of even my colleagues in the Foreign Service. But I personally do believe very strongly that we do have a tryst with destiny. We've got to play our cards well. We've got to do this well. But neighborhood matters. And in a sense, you are by yourself in this particular game, in this area. I'm not talking about the rest of the world. Thanks.
All right, so given the US-China contestation, we should definitely go it alone. I know that I'm going to try and get a lot more questions from the audience in just a bit. Ambassador Sarin, do you want to comment on this position of India when it comes to the United States? And particularly given we're in this critical moment, what will the next 4 years in the US really mean for India's position, not just in its neighborhood, but to be seen as a leader in the world?
There is no doubt that, and I think I have repeated this again and again and again, that India will not really be able to play an optimal regional role in Asia or a global role if it does not get its own neighborhood right. So it is for this reason that at least the slogan saying neighborhood first is, I think, self-evident. So I entirely agree with Manjeev that this is your karma bhumi in a sense. This is where I think it all comes together. And it is true that you cannot today say, this is my backyard, you stay out. But what you can do is that you can present yourself to your neighbors as the best partner that they could think of. Because the very asymmetry which creates anxieties amongst your neighbors, because you are so large and you are surrounded by smaller neighbors. That very asymmetry, the fact that you are already a 5th largest economy, you might become the 3rd largest economy, you are a growing economy, 6% to 7% per annum. just think about what difference it could make to our neighbors if you became the main engine of growth for all your neighbors. And the price that you have to pay for it is a very small price. Again, repeating something that I have said before. You open out your market to everything that your neighbors can produce and sell. It would still be a tiny fraction of your market. It would mean a huge benefit to them. You are the largest transit country for all your neighbors. They are all connected with you, but they are not connected to each other except through India. And yet, we are not a very friendly transit country. If you became the transit country of choice, let them use whichever railway line or highway that they want to use, whichever port they want to export, import, facilitate their own trade with you and with the rest of the world. It would really make a huge difference. So rather than having negative leverage over your neighbors, you end up with a positive leverage over your neighbors. If you do that, then the kind of opportunities which are created for countries like the US or China to undermine your interests in these regions, that would not be eliminated, but it would be diminished. And I think that is very important in terms of whatever ambitions we have to be a great regional power, a great global power. This will always bring you back. So that is something very fundamental. And there's no point in saying, oh, the Chinese are coming in here, coming in there. They are coming in there because you are leaving open spaces for them. You have to ensure that you don't leave open spaces for them.
I wanted to get one round with all of you and then go over to audience questions. Very simply, we've done not just a tour de force on India-US, but also on India's position in the world. In the next few years, and I'll say from 2024 to 2030, what are the one or two things you would like to see India and the US accomplish, which will change the paradigm of the relationship?
One thing I'd like to mention is that, as has been said, each country takes decisions in its own interests and based on the political compulsions of the leaders. So US will very often take decisions that we will be uncomfortable with. The decision to withdraw from Afghanistan in 2021 was a US political decision with consequences for others. The US decided in the Biden administration to give Pakistan a $450 million sustainment package for the F-16, which we were not comfortable with because they had their own interests. And they said, we are not enhancing the efficiency, we're just maintaining the efficiency. Now, that's an argument that doesn't work in the Indian context. So we have to understand that each country will have its own interests. And for the very same reason, we cannot go along with the US in its approach on the Russia-Ukraine conflict because we have a certain relationship with Russia. And to your point, Suhasini, in the context of Venezuela and Iran, we could go along with the US what they wanted because when our own companies did a cost-benefit analysis of what is the cost of stopping these imports versus the cost of running foul of the US sanction system in terms of access to finance and technology, the balance of benefit lay in terms of stopping the imports. Now, if you do apply the same in the context of Russia, it doesn't apply. You cannot follow what the US may want in the context of Russia. Our relationship is very, very deep. So you have to take a decision based on your interests. So I think what both countries need to do, as they do more and more with each other, is give space for differences because they will be there. And if we are able to manage and live with those differences, as they have shown to some extent on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where the Secretary of State has said that India's relationship with Russia developed at a time when we are not willing to be that kind of partner. Now we are willing to be that kind of partner. Or Jake Sullivan saying that with India we're playing the long game. So we both have to make space for these differences, manage those differences. I think based on that we can continue to consolidate.
All right. Ambassador Saran, any thoughts for the next 6 years at least?
I consider the partnership with the United States a critical one for India, because in our own development trajectory, for our own economic and social development, which is important for our own people, the partnership with the United States is indispensable. Both in terms of our access to, cutting-edge technologies, the fact that we have access to and a very strong kind of connect with the intellectual, sort of partnership between the two countries. I think these are very consequential. The areas where I would like to focus on, and where I think the initiative will have to be taken by us, are two issues. One is the economic pillar of India-US relations is still very weak. Number two, looking ahead, what will be perhaps most consequential for India is what is going to happen with respect to the climate change.
Climate change. All right.
And they're having India and the US, which are on the same platform, or at least have, if not congruence, if they have at least convergence, this would be immensely helpful to India in being able to deal with these challenges. Because that, to my mind, is probably going to be the biggest challenge that India is going to face in the coming years. I'm afraid it is not something which is fully acknowledged,
But it's
but I do certainly believe, having dealt with climate change in the past, I think there is a certain collective blindness about what this means for a country like India. And the US, with its technological prowess, is in fact one of the answers, or possible answers, to what we are doing. So
All right.
if we can have that partnership, it would make all the
That would
difference.
make... Ambassador Puri, you have...
Suhasini, thank you very much. Sir, I have to say the C word this time, and this one is climate, without any doubt. Having said this, I think critically important is the E word, economy. Leverage your friendship, your relationship with the United States to seriously upend your economy. It will mean giving them several leeways. And I mean this equally for the Europeans. If you're going to be kind of closeted, if you will find that a free trade agreement with Sri Lanka is problematic, then I don't know the answer. Having said all this, let me say something that will make us feel good. And that feel good is not necessarily that you have more money in your pocket. That's only chaps like me who get up and remind you you're becoming the 5th largest economy, and so on. Do you think they'd be willing to work with us to do something on a de jure positioning of us on a slightly higher table of global governance? Ultimate UN Security Council membership, I'm not so sure about that. I must tell you, forget what we hear from everyone, and Arun spoke about who supported us. If you had their support, you would have been in. So that's not the case. The fact of the matter is, you've seen what G20 did to us. When the G20 was formed, we were looking here and there. Why should we be roped in to be part of those who are shouldering the responsibility for not actually being the cause of what happened? Remember the 2008 economic depression and the crisis there. But look what it's done to us. Can we do something on that kind? More permanent, more de jure with them? Would it be possible? To start with, we may not be very happy, but in time, we'll start becoming very much happier. The G20 being an absolute example of that. Would they be willing to do that? I don't know. I don't know. Because frankly speaking, there does become a ceding of a certain amount of space. It's not that you're giving away your space, but you're giving the other person a certain amount of space to be on that kind of a table. Now, all of this comes at a price. There are lots of things to be paid for it. But if they could do something with us on a de jure recognition of India being a player on the world, and I told you the pinnacle is Security Council membership,
Sure.
permanent membership, somewhere in that direction, that would make us happiest.
All right.
We'd say, good guys. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's have a nuclear
I've
deal.
had the clock suddenly jump on me, but do we have 5 minutes to take a few questions?
Yeah, I think we can take 2 questions, and then I will invite Medha to give a word of thanks. Far too many hands up. So I'm going to go with one question here. Rahul Sharma, please.
Hi, good afternoon. A very engaging session. I'm Rahul Sharma. Also Rahul Sharma.
Sorry, Junior.
Yes, Head Public Affairs at Burson, India. One question, and because this is an aspect that wasn't covered in the discussion, we are talking about the emerging polity in the US. We have a new polity in India, the same polity, but it's a different situation from what we saw in the last 10 years. So Asni, go back to my days as journalist, US-India nuclear deal. I was with Lok Sabha TV, and I know the negotiations.
I'm going to ask a question really
happened.
quickly.
So here, what's the impact of what we are talking about from a domestic India polity stand and the situation and the fact that we may see more political developments in the coming few months?
All right.
Okay, we'll take one more question, and then gentleman right at the end. Yeah. No. Yeah, you, please. No. Oh, yeah. On this one, yeah, please.
Thank you all for a very enriching experience and what I was listening. And I agree with Ambassador Puri and Ambassador Shamsaran. I've been following your write-ups and books. I have 2 thoughts. And one is, we are doing, because I am...
Sir, questions, please.
Yeah. So my question is, nobody mentioned about Iran with the Shah Bahar port, and if India could align at some time to get access to Central Asia, and that is one point. And the second thought is that, as Ambassador Puri said about looking towards your neighbor, we could be a model of Singapore as a transit port, and we could gain from all these neighboring countries. Thank you, sir.
Could I ask you, Ambassador Sarang, to take the Iran question, and then we can look for volunteers on the very tough political question that Rahul has posed.
I mean, for me, the relationship with Iran is a critical relationship. So even though there may be certain shifts taking place in our relationship with the other Gulf countries, with the United States, I think we have kept our relationship with Iran on a fairly even keel, but it is not ideal. There is no doubt about that. I think there has been a certain kind of a, defensive-ness about our relationship with Iran. And I think that is something that we need to re-examine, because not only because of the Chabahar port and the access to Central Asia, but because of geopolitical reasons. You cannot think in terms of any kind of a credible balance of power in the Middle East without Iran being the major player. So to think in terms of a policy that we have with respect to what we call West Asia and the Gulf, which does not recognize the critical role that Iran plays, I think that would that would make our policy a bit unstable.
Even if that puts us at odds with the West. Do you want to speak about the political question? We're dealing with a new generation on both sides. So some of them on both sides are of Indian origin.
No, so I think the standard is, the answer is very standard and easy actually, that we claim that there is bipartisan support in the US for the India relationship. And you've seen that through Democratic Bill Clinton, Republican George Bush, Democratic Obama, Republican Trump, Democratic Biden, whoever comes next. Similarly, in the US, and on the Indian side, we said that this new relationship sort of started with Prime Minister Vajpayee, and then through Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, then Prime Minister Modi. So I think both sides would say whatever be the governance structure in either side, you continue to make the effort to broaden the relationship.
And 25 years of really going upwards. Do you wanted to add anything?
Suhasini, this is an interesting question. And if we weren't sitting in this huge hall, maybe we could have had a little go at you. Young man, let's take on, give me a few minutes. Let's take on what Arun just said. Of course, this is a relationship which is very dense, very important. To you and me, it's important. Why? Because our sons, brothers, daughters, etc. are there, and they have some investments here, etc., etc. Therefore, that will certainly continue. Trump or no Trump, 4 years of Trump, doesn't matter. Kamala Harris and whatever they may pick on us for our human rights and this, that, and the other, doesn't matter. All that will continue. These are two huge, massive economies. India is an economy of interest to the United States. Let's have no doubts about that, which is why G20 and many such sort of things. For us, they are not just economy, they are a power of interest. Why? Because they have the means and the abilities, and so therefore they are of great interest to us. Otherwise, let's remember, to the extent you can, all countries play games. Our abilities are much less. Thank you.
Medha?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say let the games begin or let lunch begin, but I just like a round of applause for our amazing panel.
Great. In the interest of not eating into the lunchtime, I will very quickly thank the panel. Thank you, Ambassador Shyam Saran, Ambassador Singh, Ambassador Puri, Suhasini, for a very, very invigorating discussion today and sharing your insights. To the delegates present in the room, we'll take a quick break for lunch. We have a very short lunch break. Lunch will be in Mumtaz. Kindly be back by 1:40, because at 1:45 sharp, we'll start our next session, which is a session with the secretaries. A lot of you all had wanted this session, so let's just please be back here by 1:40. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.